Oh, hello! My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Woe. Okay, so here we are now in September, which means it is time to wrap up the month of August in terms of reading. This is kind of a weird video for me just because August was kind of a weird month, and I wanted to share, I've shared a little bit about this on some of my other platforms, but I did want to just say this because this is my main channel, and I just want to let you guys know in terms of why I might be a little off now and for the next couple of weeks, and just in terms of if I'm not as responsive as I would like to be. Honestly, just wanting to kind of let you know why, and that is because unfortunately my father passed away a few days ago, and it was very unexpected. He had been sick. I think I've mentioned that before. He had been sick the previous year. He had cancer. He beat 2 different types of cancer in his lifetime. He was very stubborn and definitely a fighter. But that unfortunately really compromised his immune system, and he was on a trip with my mother to Scotland, which was his last big kind of like bucket list item. He really wanted to see St. Andrews, and that was actually the last thing that they did before coming back. And unfortunately he picked up a bug, and something that most people could handle fine, but because he had no immune system, unfortunately he did not survive that. So I'm a little shocked still. It was very unexpected, as I said, just because he had been sick previously, but he actually like kind of kicked cancer's ass. So we're all kind of a little shell-shocked, a little kind of floating around in the molasses. I'm not quite sure kind of what to do with ourselves. But thank you so much to everyone for the lovely messages. I'm sorry if I've not gotten back to you. I just kind of haven't fully been up to that, but I did read them and really appreciate it. Everybody's been very, very kind about it. Yeah. It's, like I said, I'm going to probably be a little weird in this video and for the next few weeks, but this is something I really enjoy doing. This is a nice sort of like moment to escape. But yeah, I guess I would just say this is a reminder to all of us that it's important to get our vaccinations. He contracted the flu, and that is what he passed away from. So if you have not gotten your flu shot this year, please do it. It's not just for you, it's also for children and for elderly and for people like my dad who have compromised immune systems, who really need that herd immunity. So even though it's August and they've only just, I mean, he literally passed away from the flu in August, which in the Northern Hemisphere is sort of like kind of bizarre. But anyway, even though it's August, we have heard that CVS and other pharmacies are getting their flu vaccinations in. So please consider doing that, because yeah, it isn't just for you, it's also for other people around you. So I'm gonna kind of leave that there. All that to say, August was a month of very big highs and very big lows, because I also quit my job and started a new job. The week my father died was also the week I started work. They've been really, really lovely about it, so don't worry about that. But anyway, so it's a job I'm really excited about. I can already tell I'm really gonna love. So that was a high. I also had a couple of weeks off, so I got to do a lot of reading and kind of catching up on things. So I read a lot in August, but it just it ended up being a very weird month. and we'll just talk about some of the hits, the disappointments, and the surprises I had this month. But first we'll talk about some stats. Fair warning, I haven't totally finished making up my sheet, so I may not speak to everything on it, but I'll go over the things that I know right now. Okay, so in the month of August, I read 30 books, which is the second most books that I have read so far this year. I think if things hadn't happened with my dad, I probably would have beaten that record, because I was really on a roll between Booktubeathon and having some time off. I definitely got a lot read, and a lot of things that I really enjoyed, and also some things I really didn't enjoy. So it was definitely some highs and lows, as we will see when we get to my ratings stats here. But yeah, this is also the most I've ever read in an August. Both August and July are typically kind of lower reading volume months for me, but both of them have been some of my highest this year, so that is kind of nice to buck that trend. In terms of some of the stats that I've got going here, let's see here. So I haven't tabulated quite what I did in terms of where things came from and audio versus physical, all of that. I will say that in terms of my kind of feeling about it, I think I had a pretty typical mix in terms of, some library, a few things that I got from a subscription. I renewed my Kindle Unlimited this month, so I read a couple of things from subscription I know. I made some pretty good progress on my TBR. I got a lot of ARC reading done. So that always comes out of my TBR. And then I also think I had a pretty typical mixture in terms of genres, if I'm remembering rightly. Again, I haven't quite counted that up yet. So in terms of some of the other numbers, I read a lot just because of the number of books in terms of pages. So, you know, coming up on 10,000 pages read, average of 307 pages per book. So pretty typical for me. I think range between 300 and 350 is pretty typical in terms of the length of book. The average age was 13 years, so that I was happy with. I always like to try to not just be reading frontless, so I had a couple of things that were quite, pretty old in terms of this was the month I read Cranford, I read Delta Wedding, so a couple of classics that kind of helped even out some of the front list reading I was doing. And then an average of about 3.5 months on my TBR, so that makes me happy. That means I'm getting to things pretty quickly. At least I like to tell myself that. Not always the case, but in theory I'm getting to things pretty quickly. And then you can see I haven't counted up the total, as of when I'm recording this, I haven't counted up the total numbers yet of the ratings, but it was really a month of, at least my feeling about it was a month of real highs and lows, that I read some things I really, really liked, so a couple of all-time favorites, or a couple of favorites for the year, and then some other things I really liked, but also, you know, quite a few DNFs and quite a few like very low-rated things, so a little all over the place, and my average came out actually to exactly 3 stars, which for me means it meets expectations. It's nothing extraordinary, nothing terrible, and my default rating is a 3. So if my average was 3, that means I feel like I kind of was reading boldly in terms of not just picking things that I was for sure gonna like. I took some risks, had a swing and a miss on some of those, but that's kind of part of it. So yeah, I overall felt like this was a pretty, it was a very varied reading month, and one that I was pretty satisfied with in terms of the outcome. So let's start with a couple of surprises and then we'll get into the other stuff. So as I mentioned in my What I'm Reading Right Now video, because I did my Booktubeathon wrap up and because I did my Bookstore Picks My TBR wrap up video, some of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video, I've already talked about at length in those. So when that comes up, I'm just gonna kind of reference you to those videos. So my only surprise that I had this month was Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I will refer you to my Booktubeathon TBR wrap-up video because, yeah, I talked at length about why this was sort of surprising to me, but it was, and I ultimately, I think, gave it a 4-star and really enjoyed my time with it in a way that I wasn't quite expecting. So this is my surprise for the month. And then let's do a few disappointments. So the first one is another one from Booktubeathon, and that was Wintersong by Jae-Jones, and really this was just a case of like tonal mismatch for me. Like I couldn't get into how angsty it was. I skipped ahead to read the ending, was like, yeah, this is definitely too angsty for me. So I ended up DNFing this, so of course in that sense it was definitely a disappointment. Similarly for Artemis, I also talked about this in my Booktubeathon wrap-up. Yeah, I tried several times to get through this book and just couldn't do it. I wasn't into the authorial voice. I felt like it was just pacing-wise a little bit weird, and when I skipped ahead to the ending, again, I wasn't intrigued to keep reading, so I DNF'd. That is one trick I have in terms of getting through books, is that if I'm thinking about DNFing it, I often do read the ending to see if that kind of perks things up any for me, and in both of those cases it just didn't, so those were both disappointments. Another disappointment from my Bookstore Picks My TBR video, where I had those 3 blind dates with a book. Overall, I really enjoyed that project. I would say of the 3 that I picked, based on the descriptions, I was expecting that Wishing for Us by Sydney Landon was going to be the one I liked best, and it actually wasn't that good. It just disappointed me, basically. I felt like some of the tropes it was playing with, I didn't really like how she did it. I liked the other book that I read from her in that experiment a lot better. And actually the other book, I've subsequently read another book in that series that I also liked better. So yeah, that one was just a little bit disappointing, but you can watch that video to see my full thoughts on that. I actually really was happy with how that video came out. I know a lot of you guys really liked it, so yeah, that's, I guess, if I was ever going to recommend a video to you, maybe that might be one. I think people enjoyed me hate reading Rogue Stallion by Diana Palmer. Quite a title and quite a book. Another disappointing book I had was #MurderTrending by Gretchen McNeil. So this was one that I was actually really looking forward to because it seemed like it was essentially a version of the Hunger Games that was about a society, like a near future society that's ours, where basically convicted murderers are sent to this island filled with serial killers who then kill them, and like that's their punishment basically. And it's about a teen girl who wakes up and finds herself there, even though she was convicted for a crime that she knows she did not commit, and her navigating through it. I just felt this was a book that the premise is really interesting and had a lot of potential. I felt that it was very odd in its tone. It felt very flippant in a way that was, I assume, meant to be darkly comedic, but just did not connect with me, and I think was just basically not very successful. I think basically what I would say about this book is that I just think it was not very well written, and I think in the hands of potentially a different author, maybe this could have been better. I couldn't really recommend this to you. I think that for how gruesome the premise is, you have to have pretty good execution for me to feel like it was worth it. Like The Hunger Games, I feel like really kind of earns its horror, especially for a YA audience. I think it kind of does the work to earn how dark that book is, and I just don't know that this book did. So this was a real disappointment to me. I rated it, I think, like 2 stars. Yeah, I personally wouldn't recommend it, but it is a cool premise, so it might be worth trying to see if you can get over that piece of it. Another 2-star book for me this month was Delta Wedding by Eudora Welty. I was very disappointed by this because Eudora Welty is probably the most decorated Southern female writer. It's either her or Flannery O'Connor. I've heard a lot about her, and I've always wanted to read stuff from her. I subsequently heard that maybe I need to give some of her short stories a chance, so I'll kind of keep my mind open to that, but suffice it to say, I did not like this book. It's stream of consciousness, which I actually quite like in the hands of certain authors. So like, for instance, Virginia Woolf. I love the way she does stream of consciousness. And the actual writing in this book is beautiful. I mean, talk about evocative is really the right word for her writing. You can smell the food, you can see the rooms, you can feel the heat of the kind of Mississippi sun. It is beautiful in that respect, but I just really felt like it just never really connected with me. It was very meandering, and I think that it just frankly hasn't aged well, particularly with the portrayal of race. I think it grapples with class in an interesting way, and so that is why it's even more disappointing to me that Eudora Welty did not have the empathetic imagination to extend some of the observations I think she's making about class in this book into the African-American characters who, you know, they're free, but they're essentially treated as slaves. I mean, they're treated, it's in, I believe, the 1920s. So they are free, but they are treated terribly. They're not treated as actual humans by the characters or by the author. And I found that really hard to overcome, especially, I just didn't feel like the book as a whole was good enough for me to overcome some of those kinds of reservations that I had about its portrayal of race. And it's an interesting book in the sense that it was written, I believe, in 1946, and it's taking place in the 20s, so I think it does have a lot of interesting things to say about class and sort of like the ending of a certain epic of the Southern economy with the Great Depression and all the changes that come from the Great Depression for the South. So it was definitely an interesting read, and I'm glad I did it because it's, again, kind of a classic in Southern literature. It just was disappointing to me in terms of it's not like I found a new favorite author or a new favorite book. Yeah, I really just basically didn't like it very much. And then the final disappointment I have is One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus. Now this is sort of like a oft-cited example of good YA mystery, and I guess I'm just gonna have to respectfully disagree. This is another 2-star book for me. I just found it kind of inert, to be totally honest. I thought that the mystery was subpar. I thought that the characterization, while it did improve by the end of the book, I felt was pretty flat. I didn't really love many of the characters. Yeah, I do read a lot of mystery, so this might be part of it, but I literally, the second that the character who ultimately commits the crime was introduced, I knew that they were in on it in some way just because of the description given. Again, maybe that's just because I've read quite a bit in this genre, whatever, but like that also sort of tells me like, I don't know that this is the most successful mystery to people who are big readers of the genre. Now that being said, it is YA mystery, so maybe it is meant to kind of introduce younger readers to some of the kind of typical tropes of that given genre. Fair. I'm an adult reader, so I may not be totally assessing it accurately. I do also know that some people have issues with portrayals of mental health in this book, so just also another caution there. For me, I didn't find this to be a particularly successful one. I think that there's a lot better examples of this particular subgenre, and so yeah, it was disappointing to me in that respect. Okay, so let's finally move into some hits. So again, I talked about some of these in my earlier videos. The first one being the case for, which was Undead Girl Gang by Lilly C. Anderson. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star and probably would have given it a 4.5 if she had not happened to include a description of my actual worst nightmare, like my actual biggest phobia is described in this book. And so that like I had a hard time dealing with that, so I had to knock it down a little bit, but it is really excellent. All the hype that you've heard about this particular book I think is very well deserved. I really enjoyed its portrayal of female friendship and just friendship in general for teenagers. I thought it really treated teenagers as actual people, actual humans, and that's something I always look for in YA. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one and think it deserves a lot of the praise it's getting. Another hit for me this month was The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Again, I talked about this in my Booktubeathon wrap up as I did Undead Girl Gang. The only thing I'll add to this is that now this book has a particular kind of weight in my heart because this is the last birthday present I gave to my dad for him to read while he was in Scotland, and he was in the middle of reading it when he passed, and my mom said that he was enjoying it and had a lot of things that he wanted to talk to me about with it, so it now has special memories for me in terms of that as well. But yeah, this is a great book that I would really recommend and I think is really thought-provoking reading. Another book that I think I mentioned in my What I'm Reading Right Now video was formerly known as Food by Kristin Lawless. Basically, this is an expose of the kind of like industrial food complex and like just how bad it is for us. It was what I would describe as a manifesto. It was like fighting words, but I really enjoyed it and thought it was really pretty well written and pretty compelling, so I definitely would recommend that one if that is a topic that is of interest to you. Ooh, and then another dark mystery, and I'll get to, I had two that I considered to be hits. This one I didn't like quite as much as the other one I'll talk about, but Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a brutal book. It is considered to be a YA mystery, but I gotta tell you, I don't know why, because the protagonist is not a young adult. She is a young adult, I guess, but she's, I believe, 19 or 20, so she's out of the sort of like high school demographic. And while some of the events take place when she is a young adult, that's not what's happening in the actual timeline of the book. It is a dual timeline, so the premise is that it's a one of the timelines is a kind of serial type podcast about what happened to the titular character Sadie after the murder of her beloved younger sister, investigating, trying to find out what happened to her after she disappeared. And then the other timeline is from Sadie's point of view when these events are taking place. So it is an extremely dark, brutal book. I would really caution you to maybe look up some content warnings if there's any of those that you tend to care about, because it is dark. It is really well done though. I do think I was always more interested in the podcast narrative than the Sadie timeline, and for that reason I gave it a 4-star instead of a 4.5, just because I think that's always the risk if you have a dual timeline, is that one of them will end up interesting a reader more than another one. But I think this is really good. This is getting a lot of hype, and I think for good reason. But again, I personally would not consider this to be YA. It's being marketed that way. I don't think it is. I don't think thematically fits in with YA, and the protagonist is not the right age for YA. So I also just want to give that as like a little food for thought, but it was a very, very good book, but very, very dark. Okay, so then moving into my 3 favorite books of the month, my 3 biggest hits. First is Magic Triumphs by Ilona Andrews. This is wrapping up the Kate Daniels series. This is such a good book. I read this the day it came out. I have a live review that I did, a yay or nay review of this, so I'll link that somewhere. Basically what I would say is that I do think that this is a worthy ending to the series. I think that it wraps up things in a really satisfying way for the most part. I will say that there's not a lot of surprises in this, and for that reason I did knock it down to a 4-star. But I mean, come on, I think that they definitely nailed the landing for this. I think a 4-star book wrapping up a 10-book series is pretty damn good. And I would probably put this in the top 5 of the books that are in this series. So, I mean, this is definitely really good. It's just a high-quality series all around, so I didn't quite love this as much as some of the other books. I would still say that my favorite in this series is Magic Breaks, which is the 7th book, but I do think that this was really satisfying for those of you who love the Kate Daniels series. For those of you who are starting the series, just know that it ends really well, so, like, you're in good hands. You're not gonna, it's not gonna go off the rails at any point. And yeah, I'm excited to see all the side character stories, which we'll get to here in a second. But yeah, I think that it ended this arc, this 10-book arc really well, but it also set up, I think, some exciting things that are going to continue to happen in this universe in terms of side series. So yeah, congratulations to Ilona Andrews, because I think this is a real achievement to be able to to land the plane so successfully, because it's not a skill set that everyone has, for sure. So they once again proved that they know how to end a series. And then for my first 4.5 star book, it's another Ilona Andrews book, which is Iron and Magic. Now this book came out in June, but I decided to wait until right before the release of this one to read it, because it's the first book in a side series called the Iron Covenant series, but it is 9.5 in the 10 book Kate Daniels arc, if that makes sense. So Iron and Magic I just thought was excellent. I thought it was better than Magic Triumphs, to be totally honest with you. I'm really excited about it as the first book in a trilogy. I wasn't sure if I was gonna like what they were doing in that book enough to feel like it merited a full trilogy, but I do. I thought this was a really successful example of a side trilogy beginning. I think that can be kind of tricky territory for authors when they start trying to spin off side series in the same universe. Some people can do it better than others, and Ilona Andrews just proving again that they can do no wrong, at least in my eyes, in terms of pleasing me. They just really convinced me that this is going to be a really fun side trilogy. So it's a really good book in and of itself, and I think it's setting up some interesting questions for that trilogy to deal with. So yeah, 4.5 stars, one of my favorite things I've read this year. And then my last 4.5 star book is The Cheerleaders by Kara Thomas, which was the other very dark YA mystery that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I don't think this is as dark as Sadie. I think Sadie is more brutal. This one, this straddles the line between YA and adult, but I would say that this is YA ultimately. It might be a good kind of transitional books for people moving from YA mystery to adult mystery. I think this could be a nice transitional book. I will have had, I'm not sure exactly the timing wise, I did a yay or nay review of this, so you'll be able to see that at some point, me giving some more specific thoughts, but suffice it to say, I think this is one of the best examples of YA mystery that I've personally read. I think it really, again, I say this a lot about YA books that I like, and that's that it treats teenagers like humans. I think that is the biggest problem I tend to have in YA, is a lot of times, because they're trying to simplify the writing and simplify characterization and whatnot, I think a lot of times these books can end up treating teenagers as like caricatures or as just very flat. And so for me, good YA treats teenagers seriously like real humans with real human emotions and real reactions to things. Sure, they may be encountering certain situations for the first time, and that's, you know, kind of a part of what that genre is, but I always love it when those first time experiences are treated with seriousness and with serious consideration of what the emotional life of a human would be to that situation, not just a caricature of like the cheerleader or the jock or the neat, you know what I mean? Like I don't like it when books kind of fall into those lines in YA, and I think that this book goes to some really dark places, and I think well, anyway, I have a whole review about this, so we'll just leave it at that for now. But yeah, I really like this, and I think that this is definitely well worth picking up if you're into dark YA genre fiction. So that's it for me for August. Like I said, kind of a weird month for me, and I am definitely sort of still a little bit out of it, so if you don't see me around as much for the next couple of weeks, that is probably why. If I'm a little weird, please forgive me. I'm still sort of in the fog a little bit of kind of just the shock of everything, but I enjoy doing this, and I enjoy talking to you guys, so I wanted, you know, my dad, the last conversation I had with him was he was telling me to go to work. He was like, don't miss your first day, and he was very much a kind of, you know, suck it up and get on with life kind of guy, so he wouldn't want any of us to just be sort of dragging out, delaying getting back to things that we enjoy unduly. So I feel like it is in the spirit of kind of how he lived his life and how he'd want me to live mine, for me to get back into things that I enjoy, and that certainly includes this. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me in the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having a really lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!